Welcome to this first video in a series of videos around action research in history education in ECU's history education program. Just wanted to start with an introduction of what action research is and what it's all about, and this will be followed by a series of other videos that are directly related to specific pieces of the action research process. In education, there's really a tendency to use what those before us have done or our own hunches to make decisions about what and how to teach. We see this all the time. Someone, a young teacher in particular, is told to do this because it's always been done that way or because some veteran teacher that is greatly respected has used that strategy. In other instances, teachers will oftentimes have a sense of something that works, or even a district will adopt something based on what they heard somebody else say works. This practice, unfortunately, has often led to a cycle of ineffectiveness, though, where poor practices are perpetuated, where ideas that have not truly been tested or maybe don't fit the context in which the teacher is teaching, those things where it may not actually work. What we really need is a process for classroom teachers and for leaders in districts and schools for making informed decisions, a process for making informed instructional decisions based on research and valid data collection processes. Action research is that process. Action research, simply stated, is teachers doing research. Now, there are really two purposes to action research. The first of those is to solve an immediate problem. In fact, we'll talk later about a problem statement. There is some issue that's going on in your classroom. For example, when I was teaching, there was this thing that was coming about called the achievement gap. This would have been in the late 90s, early 2000s. And I said, no, that's not happening in my classroom. That the idea of the achievement gap was that African-American students in particular were performing much lower than white students, with all other variables relatively the same. But when I actually looked at the hard data one day, I found that that was the case in my own classroom, that there was a great disparity between what my Caucasian students, how they were performing on end of course assessments, and my African American students. And so I wanted to confront that problem, and I conducted an action research study where I looked at the use of graphic organizers as a way to try to improve the performance of particularly my African American students. So that would be an example of me seeing an immediate problem and wanting to implement some sort of intervention, or we'll use the term treatment, to sort of deal with that problem. The other type of action research is sort of a progressive problem solving through reflection. These whereas the first kind oftentimes are more quantitative or are related to measurable things that can be tested and we can actually generate some numbers from them. Some of these progressive problem solving action researches, studies through reflection, are ones that are more qualitative, where we actually have more anecdotal evidence that we begin to pull and we begin to use. And this happens over a period of time. And in some cases, the two sort of merge together. So I went on for a series of years, a series of action research studies that I did that were meant to deal with problems, but to also begin to inform my teaching over time. And so I implemented different little interventions each and every semester that I taught to try to see if I could really hone down a great way to teach. I often liken this when I'm talking to people. When you think about action research, I often think about an equalizer board on a stereo, if you know what I'm talking about. It's where you have all of these controls that adjust something about the sound. And what we're trying to do with action research, we're trying to keep it very simple. We're trying to go about it in an informed way so that when we make an adjustment, we can tell whether, or we can have a reasonably good guess that that adjustment that we made is what is influencing some change in behavior, some change in performance, some change in a student's ability to score well or retain content or comprehend text, etc. Right? And so if you think about it as this equalizer board, we want to just identify one knob. We want to find one thing that we change. When action research gets to be problematic, it's when we can't really tell what's happening, it's when we begin to adjust too many knobs. So at this early stage, I want you to think about it as us using that equalizer board, and there's all these knobs that can affect things in our classroom, but we identify one thing to address one outcome that we're looking for, and we begin to adjust that one knob on that equalizer board to see what effect that is going to have, right? The primary concern of action research is that we are trying to have some sort of change in our classroom. We want to see some change. It may be that we want to make some behavior more likely or another behavior less likely. It may be that we want our students to retain content more. It may be that we want our students to be able to process information more. It may be that we want to get students engaged in participation more, or engaged in the classroom more. Or it may be that we want to create a different environment in our classroom, more sense of inclusiveness in our classroom. So therefore we're trying to adjust students to see if we can affect the students' perception of their role in the classroom, or their feeling of inclusiveness in that classroom. All of these things are what we're trying to do, but we're in essence trying to change our classroom, right? And what we're really doing is we're marrying problem solving with data collection. Rather than going on a hunch, rather than going on what somebody said we ought to do, we are investigating, we are researching what others in research environments have done. We are choosing a solution to a problem based on that in an informed way, and then we are testing it with some sort of fidelity to process so that it can be replicated and we can actually tell if it is the change that we've made that is causing the change in the behavior, the performance, the perceptions of our students. As I said, in education, action research is teachers doing research in their classrooms. It is not some outside expert sampling a series of variables. In fact, I really like the term, if you want to conceptualize what action research is, I like the term quality improvement. It's that we're trying to improve the quality of instruction in our classroom. It is technically quasi-experimental research, meaning that we don't always have randomized or significant sample sizes. But the idea that we are trying to implement some intervention to affect some change that will make our classroom a more productive, a more inclusive, a more effective place for students to learn. That's what action research really is. So now that we know what that is, we now are ready to talk about what the ways that we set it up, the way that we begin to identify those problems and topics, and the ways that we begin to ask questions that we then can go about and research. So be ready for that next video. That one's coming up. Video 2 is variables and research questions.